Before you design a certification program, there are many questions you should ask to get better outcomes for your organization and your learners.
Since most people tend to think of tests, I keep saying, so what's the problem you're solving? If everyone passed your test, what miracle will happen in this world? What will be different? And I find it, one of the mistakes is people talk about we want to certify. That's a vehicle. That's not a goal. You assume that the certification will produce an outcome for you.
That's today's guest, Judy Hale. An expert on performance-based certification, Judy will step us through how to design a valid, defensible, cost-effective program. Next on Powered by Learning.
Powered by Learning is brought to you by DaVinci Interactive. DaVinci's approach to learning is grounded in 30 years of innovation and expertise. We use proven strategies and leading technology to develop solutions that empower learners to improve quality and boost performance. Learn more at davinci.com.
Joining me today is Jenny Fadulo, DaVinci's Director Learning Experience, and our guest, Judy Hale. Judy is a longtime speaker and author and is the principal at Hale Associates. She joins us from her office in Illinois to talk about her book, Performance-Based Certification, How to Design a Valid, Defensible, Cost-Effective Program. Hello, Judy.
Hi, Judy. It's nice to see you again.
Well, thank you both for having me here. I'm looking forward to answering your questions and finding out what your perspectives are.
Well, thanks, Judy. Let's start out by giving our listeners a brief overview of your career so they understand kind of the experiences you're bringing to today's conversation.
Well, I started my company in 1974, and over the years, I have mostly been hired to design or audit or validate credentials. Now, what I mean by that are certifications and certificate programs. Now, when we started those many years ago, most of those were offered by trade and professional associations. Now, the larger player are corporations who want to certify not just their own employees, but their suppliers, their aftermarket partners. So many companies have outsourced. So they want to make sure that the groups that they've outsourced really carry their brand, represent them, are competent in that way. So I have worked across all industries. By the way, the most amusing, best ones are amusement parks. And I've worked with medical, the high-tech people, and I've worked across both private and public sectors. Does that help you a little bit? You need to know more?
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. We'll dive right in then.
Yeah, it's quite a niche that you've found for sure. I know that we've worked with several of our clients to certify their courses, and you don't see much out there to help guide companies. So when I came across your book, I was pleasantly surprised to see that it aligns in many regards with the approach that we take. I'm curious, Judy, what inspired you to write it? What was the catalyst, and how did you identify the critical components that make a certification program valid?
Well, you are the right-on example of why I wrote it. People want to do this work, but there was no easy resource. Oh, sure, you can download ISO, ANSI standards or any of the other credentialing or accrediting bodies, but it doesn't walk you through the process. And I saw lots of good people doing their best without guidance. So I went to the associations that were doing this, but they were unwilling or uninterested. So I said, why not? So I actually used groups that have very good programs, and I interviewed them, and they provided the basis behind that. There was nothing in the marketplace if you wanted to do this. So why not provide that? Now, you could go to annual conferences, but that's a rather inefficient way to learn it. Go once a year for 4 days, and hopefully you went to the right sessions. So it seems like, again, it was a very inefficient way. But I saw good people struggling, and that made no sense to me. So I had the audacity to write a book. And that book has actually been very well received. It's won awards, and I've been told by people how much it's been very useful for them, okay? But I didn't think it up by myself, please. I actually work with clients that have very good, very robust programs, what they learned. And so many times when you think about certification, they'll talk about the test.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that's important, that's a very small component of the whole process. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, at a high level, will you walk us through the step-by-step process that you recommend, and maybe what are some common pitfalls that organizations should avoid?
Well, certainly, since most people tend to think of tests, I keep saying, so what's the problem you're solving? If everyone passed your test, what miracle will happen in this world? What will be different? And I find one of the mistakes is people talk about we want to certify. That's a vehicle. That's not a goal. You assume that the certification will produce an outcome for you. So the goal, then the first step is really, what are we talking about? What is the problem? What are the metrics? And by the way, who are these people that we want to certify? Are we talking about members of our profession? Or are we talking about people who completed our training program, academic program? Who are we talking about? And again, it's amazing how people talk like they're in agreement, but when you get them to define those attributes, you find how apart they actually are, okay? Then the next step is, okay, now that we've agreed on why, who, and what we'll track measures, now let's do a job study. Now, this is the piece that's key to defensibility. So in a professional trade association, you go out and you actually tend to survey those people. But in a corporate world, it's a closed system. You're not asking about how Harry did it. You're talking about your proprietary information, your proprietary rules, but you have to define those. And here's where the mistakes are. You don't bring in stakeholder voices. You bring in the person who designed it, not necessarily the people who depend on it. Now, what's this going to look like? Are we going to allow a pre-test for people to see how ready they are? Are we going to provide training, resources? Are we going to give people feedback? What's this going to look like that way? Once you've got that, and somewhat in parallel, you might ask, who's going to oversee this? So in a corporate world, it would be someone in HR, maybe the line organization, depending on it, and maybe some other vested parties. And they are key to define, well, what happens when a person fails? Do we allow them to retake? How many times do they get to retake the test? And if it's a corporate world, do they get to study on the clock or on their own time? And how many times can they retake the test? In a professional trade association, they have questions like, is the test on demand, or is it only tested given once a year? Do you have to wait a whole year to do a retake? How do you do those things? So you need a body, not just the training organization, or you actually need an oversight body. And you need to make sure it's representative of the stakeholders. And those are the kinds of policy decisions that they're going to incorporate for you, okay? Once you've done that, now you actually go out and build it. So build the test, build the reference, the training, the marketing piece, how you're going to promote it, sell it, whatever, and things like that. In that building, you should be doing formative tests, beta tests. Does it work? Do you have the infrastructure? How are you going to deliver this test? Do they have to go to a test center? Can they do it at their desk? So it's all that administrative. A lot of people don't think through. And then, of course, you implement and you track and evaluate. Are the miracles happening that you wanted? Are people signing up? So anyway, one of the mistakes is that groups, in their desire to be elegant, will create something that's actually administratively so burdensome, too costly to administer. So these are the kinds of decisions you need to think through. So we built this horse. Can we really ride it? How long will it go? I'm sorry, I'm big on analogies, so I can go overboard. I hope I'm getting the point across that you really need to think through how this is going to look when it becomes live. Well, if those of you in training know, how are you going to keep your content current? We build training. We don't think through how agile our systems are. How can we update the content, right?
I think those listening would feel reassured that the steps you just walked through should be familiar to those listening, right? These are the steps we go through when we create a learning solution, right? We start with what's the problem. We do a task analysis. We then move to design, then to development, then implementation. So I think it's probably reassuring for those listening that it's a familiar process.
Well, again, too many people start with building the test.
Exactly. Yep. They start with the solution at the end. Yep. So Moving on, you highlight the idea that to expect performance from employees, organizations, they have to be equipped with the right tools and resources. Could you elaborate on how this principle impacts the design and effectiveness of a certification program, and perhaps maybe share some best practices?
Let's talk about you want to do this. Where are these people you want to certify? It's one thing if they work in your office and they're down the hall. It's another thing if they're on all 6 continents around the world. It's another thing if they all share the same background. They all went to the same kind of schools. But when you think about it, a lot of people, their point of entry is very diverse. Certifications were originally designed for people who completed accredited academic programs. That's a small universe anymore. If you think about roofers, I do a lot of work with them. Well, how do you get to be a roofer? My heavens, your point of entry could be any number of things. And by the way, there are 15 different roofing systems. And by the way, knowing one doesn't mean you can do another one. They're so unique. So part of that is, how are we going to administer this? Do we even have a database system to track who applies? Do we have a system that will administer a test? Is it going to be hands-on test? Oh my heavens, where are we going to do that? The roofers, because they're a unique situation, because their warranties are by the manufacturer. So the manufacturers have a need for installers to be competent, because a mistake by the installer doesn't get punished. The manufacturer gets punished. Their warranty is violated. See? So what happens then? So how do they do that? And by the way, roofers don't do multiple choice work. None of us go to work and answer multiple choice questions. Multiple choice are so removed from the work, but it's the primary way in which we test. And they require a codified body of knowledge. Have we ever bothered to codify? Which books are we going to talk about? Whose manuals? Who wrote them? How old are they? Are they still current? So that's the infrastructure. Am I answering your question? That's the infrastructure.
Yeah. No, I love the specific examples about the roofers, right? That really helps put it in context.
Yeah, that's helpful, Judy. How about some advice for people just getting started with the certification program?
Pick 3 best practices that those listening, would be super helpful for them when they're faced with this challenge.
Okay, I've got 10 best practices, but I'll give you 3. One of them is actually designing a system that is cost feasible to administer. Another best practice is try to be performance proficiency based. Now, this is how we can do through portfolios. That's the new areas. Project-based certification. You're given a project, there's criteria, and you deliver. Or portfolios. You actually produce copies or samples of your work. Those are the really new ones coming up. And another best practice is really to take the time to correlate the number of people who complete it with your miracle you thought was going to happen. Take the time to say, does it matter? Are fewer accidents happening? I am not impressed by high failure rates. That just tells me you have not adequately communicated the requirements. Shame on you. So don't tell me about, only 30% of our people pass. This is something you should be ashamed of, not proud of, because you have not done the job of adequately setting the expectations and helping people get prepared for what they're doing.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, we shouldn't be setting our audience up for failure, right? We should be building it so that, the right way so they pass. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So your book emphasizes, and you talked a little bit about the importance of customizing the programs with the roofers. Can you share maybe some other examples of how different industries can tailor the programs to meet their specific needs?
Part of this is, we talk about doing a job task analysis. I think we need to do a practice analysis. Now, I'll give you the right-on examples. For example, dentists. Let's talk about dentists. Dentists are board certified, but a dentist in the United States is different than the dentist in other parts of the world. In the United States, you have to know how to administer antibiotics to prevent infection. You have to know how to prevent pain. In other countries, dentists don't do that at all. Somebody else does that. They just drill and fill. So customization is looking at what's different in practice based on legal changes around the world, based on access to resources around the world. So we tend to think that a job is the same around the world. It is not. In some parts of the world, you have access to resources. Other parts of the world, you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So with so much going on, rapid advancement of technology, AI, changes in the workforce, how do you see the role of certification programs evolving in maybe the next 3 to 5 to 10 years even?
There's actually two arenas. One is how the certifying group uses technology to create its own tests and administer. So one, we certainly have AI being used to generate questions. That's very real. But what about virtual reality to use to actually assess? Virtual reality is now much more cost competitive. The equipment is smaller. It's much more cost feasible. You can actually test people in very discrete medical procedures. The trades are using it to teach safety, and they're actually assessing people in teamwork. So virtual reality is a technology, as well as AI, that we use for the creation and the delivery of our tests or certifications. On the other side, you have the person you want to certify and how is technology affecting their job. And now we have what we call badges. So I might certify you in this small aspect, which is maybe using a software, maybe it's a shared drive or electronic tool. I don't know. So, well, vendors, this is one. Vendors produce software and they now certify their customers in the use of that software. So if you had a software that enabled the legal profession to track all the venues of cases, you would want your administrative assistant to know how to properly poll that database and generate reports. So they actually certify their people to do that. So now you're certifying people in the use of a technology, search engines, whatever, in doing their work. Now maybe that may only be a small piece of the work. So that's where badges come in. You can certify them in the use of this software or hardware. And then maybe you certify them in other things. One of the new phenomena is what we call the creation of badges or smaller micro-credentials.
Yeah, I know we certainly use badging as a way to recognize learners, when they've completed certain things or they've, to show that achievement. So it's good to see that correlation for sure. Thank you for opening us up to this world of certification, right?
Yes.
That many listening probably didn't think much beyond, a test, right? So it was really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
I agree. Yeah, thank you, Judy. This was really interesting to learn not just the step-by-step process for designing a certification program, but hearing a little bit about the pitfalls and the importance of customization and all the ways that technology is impacting this field. And certainly you've seen it all over the years. So we want to thank you for joining us as our guest and sharing your insights with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope people get some insights from what I was able to share.
They will. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Judy.
Jenny, Judy's points were really interesting for our listeners wanting to create performance-based certification. But, we don't often hear much about the process for making that happen.
I agree, Susan. It was such an insightful discussion. To have her book and the process she laid out is so valuable for organizations aiming to create those defensible certification programs. And her step-by-step guide really emphasizes the importance of approaching certifications just like we approach creating custom learning solutions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. And special thanks to our guest, Judy Hale. If you have an idea for a topic or a guest, please reach out to us at poweredbylearning@davinci.com. And don't forget that you can subscribe to Powered by Learning wherever you listen to your podcast.